My name is Karen Edmondson. On behalf of Thieme Publishing Company, I'd like to welcome you to our web seminar. Our web seminar will be covering the topic of the pandemic and how it affects the business of dermatology. We have two amazing presenters for you today, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about Dr. Dover and Dr. Marawala. Dr. Jeffrey Dover was born in Brooklyn and raised in Ottawa, Canada, where his extended family still resides. He is proud of his two daughters, Sophie and Isabel, and his wife, Tanya, who also practices dermatology at Skincare Physicians in Boston. Dr. Dover graduated as the silver medalist, magna cum laude, with an MD degree from the University of Ottawa. His dermatology training was received at the University of Toronto, followed by research fellowships at St. John's Hospital for Diseases of the Skin at the University of London in London, England, and a 2-year photomedicine fellowship at the Beth Israel Hospital and the Mass General Hospital of Harvard Medical School. Dr. Dover is a former associate professor of dermatology at Harvard Medical School. He was the chief of dermatology at the New England Deaconess Hospital for over 10 years, and also associate chairman of dermatology at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. He is associate clinical professor of dermatology at Yale University School of Medicine, and associate professor of dermatology at the Brown Medical School. He's a Boston dermatologist and co-director of Skincare Physicians, and Dr. Dover's research interests are in lasers in medicine, cosmetic surgery, and medical education. Dr. Dover is also past president of the American Society of Dermatologic Surgery, the American Society for Lasers in Medicine and Surgery, and the New England Dermatological Society. He has organized and directed numerous medical conferences, including Controversies in Cutaneous Laser and Cosmetic Surgery with Dr. Arndt. Dr. Kavita Marawala is a board-certified dermatologist and a nationally recognized key opinion leader in dermatology and dermatologic surgery. Her expertise is in the areas of anti-aging procedures and skin cancer treatment. She is sought after for opinions on cosmetic formulations and is regularly invited as a featured speaker in the United States and overseas. Prior to starting her own private practice, Dr. Marawala was the director of cutaneous oncology at St. Luke's Roosevelt and Beth Israel Medical Centers in New York City. Dr. Marawala has been recognized for her extensive work in the area of dermatologic education and is considered an expert injector of fillers and neuromodulators. She has written 2 editions of a widely used book, Primer in Dermatologic Surgery, which is a highly regarded textbook by residents and seasoned dermatologic surgeons. Most recently, she authored the Cosmeceutical Compendium, an encyclopedic guide on ingredients commonly used in cosmetic formulations. It was received with rave reviews by both physicians and beauty editors and is constantly updated. Most recently, Dr. Marawala released her 4th book entitled The Business of Dermatology. Dr. Marawala earned her degree in medicine at the Yale School of Medicine, where she also completed her dermatology residency and fellowship training. When she's not working, you can find her building Legos with her 3 boys and trying to perfect pizza on the barbecue alongside her husband, Kabir. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Dover and Dr. Marawala.
Well, Karen, thanks so much. And Kavita, it's such a treat to be joining you tonight using this medium of remarkable virtual reality. Kavita's in Long Island and I'm in Newton, just outside of Boston. And we're going to talk tonight about the business of dermatology. Together, Kavita and I edited a book, which is the first book ever written on the business of dermatology. And it's was put together by experts around the nation and the world based on their hands-on experience in actually starting and managing and running dermatology practices. So we thought we'd take this hour to talk about any topics that come up in your minds. Those of you who are listening, you can post questions and we'll answer all of them. But I thought we'd start off by asking Kavita, what's happened in your practice, this burgeoning young and growing practice in the last 2 years during this onslaught we call COVID-19?
Yeah, well, Jeff, first of all, thank you so much for that question. And it's always a joy to do any kind of project with you. For those of you who are listening, we do have a chat that's open, so please use it. And what you might not know is that Jeff, not only is he a champion of lasers and education, but he is a champion always of young women in dermatology. I like to think it's because he's a dad girl, girl dad, but he mentored me. And honestly, I would never have had the sort of bravery and fortitude to start my own practice had I not been able to witness firsthand the excellence with which he practices. And I think that's kind of the theme of tonight. When we talk about the pandemic, there are things that were really hard. For me in my practice, the HR component was probably the hardest to deal with. We figured out how to do infection control. We figured out how we were going to keep ourselves safe, but just getting people to show up to work seemed to be the monumental hurdle that we faced on a daily basis. Like, you never knew what you're going to wake up to and who was going to text in that they weren't coming in today, or simply just not show up and almost like ghost you. You hire people and then they come to work for 2 weeks and then they just disappear, which is something I've never experienced in all the years that I've been in practice. How is it in Boston?
Well, we're facing a similar dilemma. It's interesting. I tell my fellows now that I've been doing dermatology long enough that the dermatology part of what I do is actually the easiest part of my day. Injecting fillers I find easy and fun and creative. Using lasers and lights is easy. Dealing with patients can be tricky, but dealing with staff, that's your most important asset, by far your most expensive asset in your practice or cost center. And in COVID, and now as COVID eases a bit, it's become even more difficult. So closing the practice, which we had to do for 3.5 months, was easy. Reopening it was difficult, but the hardest part has been retaining our best employees, instilling trust of us to them and vice versa, because gaining an employee and keeping one is the best and most important thing you can do for a practice. But hiring in the time of COVID, not easy. Getting people to actually just show up, not easy. Training them and teaching them, not easy, because a lot of it's virtual. People sometimes just don't come to the job. They interview, they get picked for the job, don't come, or they come, but they show up half an hour late, 4 days in a row, 5th day they don't come. And they don't know anything, so they're there to be taught, but they don't come. So the hardest part in our practice right now is keeping our best staff, ensuring that they feel trusted and that we really care about them, which we do, ensuring that they're well paid, well cared for, kept safe, and that they know we have their backs. Because keeping your staff is a lot easier than trying to hire new. There's some data that costs over $10,000 to hire a new person. That's aside from their salary. And if someone comes and goes, the amount of effort your staff makes to find them and hire them, and then if they don't last for 6 months, the cost differential and the exhaustion of your staff is actually monumental.
So let me ask you something. Did you feel like you had to change your wage structure or levels through the pandemic?
Well, originally we didn't, but now we have to, because there is wage inflation, and I read an awful lot of nonfiction. I like too much. Sometimes I put it away because it can be overwhelming, but you read about an inflation rate of 7 or 9%. Well, so how come it's 30% in the real world? Like, gas didn't increase 7 or 9%. It seems to me it doubled at the tank, at the pump. And so wages too. So you want to hire good people, but in this country, the word respect is often used when really what that means is pay me more. So professional athletes say to the owners of the baseball team, you're not respecting me. What that means is you're not paying me enough. And so that's now translating into our real world, which is, look, I love working with you and for you, but I like your respect. I like the fact you take good care of me. But in the end, are you going to pay me more because there's a practice down the street or a hospital down the street that's hurting badly? We're talking about the hospitals in Boston losing tens of thousands of employees. So they got to find them somewhere. We don't want them to come to our office and take them. So I think, but it's always more than that. It's not just the amount you pay people, but it's how well you treat them with respect and dignity, like we try to treat our patients. And if you have a work environment which is very attractive, which dermatology is, right? It's daytime hours for the most part. For the most part, the patients are lovely. For the most part, our patients aren't dying. For the most part, it's really fun. There are also added benefits of working in a dermatology practice for the staff, but we've got to pay them well as well and make sure that they get enough time off for their mental health as well as their physical health. So
Yeah,
yes, the short answer is we've had to make changes.
Yeah, I found that my base wage has increased exponentially just to try to retain talent. In my old, I call it the panorama days, a certain level would get you somebody who was highly skilled with a lot of experience. And now I found that that number has increased, and you get somebody who has no experience and they're still asking for a very large hourly wage. One of the things that I ended up doing was pivoting a bit. So I have a decent general dermatology population too. So I do aesthetics, I do Mohs, I do Gen Derm. For me, I was able to stay open. We saw a lot of emergencies because I do a lot of surgery. Kids were home alone with their parents and getting lacerations, and they didn't want to take them to the emergency room. I did a tremendous amount of pediatric lax during the pandemic just to suture up our patients. So we were able to stay open, seeing emergencies and things like that. What I found was that my medical derm not giving that up helped me to stay afloat. But what happens is that when you have a medical derm schedule, it's very different than a cosmetic schedule. And the pace is very different, and you need people. You can't kind of wing it. For me personally, one thing that fared well for me was that I learned, and this was a tip I got from you, Jeff, how to do every single part of my office. So I know how to load patients. I know exactly what to put in the EMR. I don't rely on somebody to make my biopsy kits. Of course, I have people who do that. But if push comes to shove and I only have 2 people who show up that day, we all sort of pitch in and do all of the things. And I think that's really important, that when you're in a practice, no matter how many years you're in, especially with technology, know how to do most of the things. So if you find yourself suddenly really on a limb, you're not dead in the water. The other thing I did was I pivoted to virtual scribes, and that pivot actually saved my practice because there were days where we just didn't have enough people for the number of patients that were coming in who would come to work. It was bananas on Long Island. And I think if I had not contracted with this virtual scribe company, I don't think we would have, made it through. There would have been days where I would have had to just call the patients and say, I'm sorry, I don't have enough staff to see you. So the virtual scribes, the company I used is called Hello Rache, R-A-C-H-E. They are these registered nurses from the Philippines, and I walk around with them on my little iPad. And I introduce them to the patients. I'm like, this is Catherine. She's my remote nurse. People understand that now, words that you never thought a patient would accept. And she's going to be scribing for me today. And they're amazing. They literally saved my practice. And if you'd asked me 2 years ago, you're going to walk into a room with somebody on a video screen, I would have said, there's no way patients are going to tolerate that. There's no way that's going to keep the culture of my practice. There's no way that would ever work. And it turns out even now, it's the best thing I could have ever done for my practice.
So, everybody has different approaches. This is a novel approach, which I've learned about this very second along with all of you, but I love the idea. The whole EMR has changed our practices, which all took place just before COVID. Luckily, not during COVID, because that would have been catastrophic, because switching to an EMR, for those of you who haven't yet done it, it's not nearly as easy as anybody tells you. Company comes in with the EMR and they show you boom, 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 they leave, and then you think, what did they just do? It's like my kids on Excel. I say, could you show me that just like 10 times slower? They say, Dad, just move away. I'll just do it for you. So that's what we do now. But so we don't use scribes in our practice just because our head nurses determined that that would overwhelm our staff, because we have almost 40 nurses at our practice. If we had to then have a scribe in every room of 35 rooms, that's like another 35 staff members. So our head nurse said, why don't we not do that and let's just get more efficient? So that all happened just before COVID. And then with COVID, what we realized is we could be even more efficient. Even though we have a very efficient practice, we decided we could be more efficient. So we were forced to close. Then we had to furlough some staff. But what we realized was not everybody who furloughed really had a place at skincare physicians when it came time to come back. So we brought back essential personnel in place, some virtual, and slowly but surely brought people back. But our overhead rate has actually dropped considerably during COVID. Our efficiency rating has gone up. I work even harder than I did before. I went from 2 RNs with me to 1, often now with no fellow, just me, alone in the room. But a wonderful nurse, like our best nurses, set everything up, do the consent, do the photography, do the education before and after. But I'm in the room and I've got 3 hands because I'm injecting with one, holding with the other, and writing my note with my 3rd hand. But I've learned to be efficient. I'm more on time than I ever was before. I started earlier and finished later. Our schedules are more efficient. And in fact, what's remarkable is our revenue has gone up and our overhead has gone down. So it's been a double win for the practice. And we realized what you really want is great staff, not a lot of okay staff. So our best nurses now say, we'd rather work alone in Dr. Dover's busy clinics, even though it's a lot of work, rather than having one strong nurse and one less strong nurse. They say, I'll just do it myself. Then I know who's in what room and who's doing what. But I've learned to have to inject by myself in the room, which takes some skill, and it's exhausting. But like Kavita, we've had to figure this out, and you can't not have good notes because in the end, they're legal documents. So I think everybody will find their way to do this. But what I'd like to do, Kavita, is move ahead a little bit and talk maybe a bit about this cosmetic boom that happened starting in March of 2021, when the vaccines started to come out and our patients finally were less scared and came in literally overnight and said, I looked at Zoom and I hate the way I look. I need to come in. So our practice went from being not very busy to the busiest ever. But that's been great. But I now see inflation, which we all see, but I also see a recession coming on the tail of this inflationary period, which most economists believe we're going to see. It could be severe, but I think that this huge wave is going to die down. And so practices that are not diversified, I personally see as potentially having some trouble coming in these headwinds. So Kavita, you've already mentioned it a bit, but what do you see coming forward the next 6 months to a year? And how will you deal with this potential change in the practice?
You know, I think this is the really important part about the business side of dermatology. I think that it is about making sure that your revenue streams and your cash flows are being watched. A lot of people on the medical derm side, you know, a lot of patients have deductibles. So as much as it's uncomfortable to ask patients to keep a credit card on file, if you don't, you are not going to collect that money. And so you'll have done the work and your patient accounts receivable is going to just balloon. And that's something that's really important to watch. So train your front desk on how to check for deductibles, how to explain to patients in a nice way that we keep a credit card on file and this is why. And if they choose not to, have a set rate based off of Medicare that you have patients pay at that moment, because patient accounts receivable is something that really takes a hit when deductibles are high, which almost everyone's is. And when there's a recession, the doctor bill is the last thing they're going to pay, because by the time they get their EOB, it's about 60 to 90 days later, and that's forgotten. Their acne is done, their cyst is gone, their skin cancer is removed. You're going to be the last person getting paid. So that would be my first tip. So we really developed ways that you can say it in a nice way and explain it to patient, but man, it can be a really awkward conversation. One thing we found that also helps, you know, sometimes people say, oh, call patients before they're coming to let them know they have a balance. And it's like, okay, but then they're likely to not come because they would have paid the balance by now if they, you know they owe it. we set up a text reminder that goes out basically 2 days beforehand. So it helps alleviate a little bit of that conversation. So we just say, oh, did you get the text message that there's a balance? Would you like to take care of that today? So patients aren't completely surprised. And then lastly, the other thing that I think is really important is to figure out for yourself where your pricing is going to be on the cosmetic side. I do not recommend having sales or giveaways, no matter how much you feel like recessionary prices are going to hit your practice, because discounting yourself, it's very hard to then go backwards once you deem the recession over, or at what point are you going to go back to your quote unquote normal pricing? For us, we've actually had to increase the price because the cost of goods have gone up. And so we explain that to patients. We give them a time period at which it's going to go into effect. So for us this year, it's July 1st. We're increasing our prices due to inflation. Patients understand, but
they don't like it, but they
don't like it.
Right. And
what are you doing, Jeff?
Smarty pants will say, oh yeah, I know. You're just raising you're going to take advantage of this inflationary time and raise the prices. And I just don't answer, because it's not an argument you're going to win. I do think I'll add to what Kavita said, which is so important, which is the diversification of a practice. Most people assume that skincare physicians is 100% cosmetic, when in fact it's significant majority is insurance-based general dermatology, pediatrics, adult general dermatology, skin cancer surgery, skin checks, mole checks. I do general dermatology. It's the bread and butter of my practice. Although 90+% of my practice is now laser and cosmetic, I've been working at this for almost 40 years. It doesn't happen overnight, but my young colleagues come in and say, okay, I want a job. I'm going to work 4 days a week. I want cosmetics 4 days a week. I'm not doing any general derm. We say, well, what planet are you living on? Because we earn our patients one patient at a time. We don't advertise. We don't have special sales. We don't have birthday sales. We don't adjust pricing, of course, except for teachers and students with acne scarring, which I always do just voluntarily and unilaterally. But as Kavita mentions, once you discount a price, it's discount for the rest of your life. Did anybody ever go into Macy's and pay full price for anything in the last 20 years? No. I went to Bloomingdale's pre-COVID. I don't like to shop in person. I don't even like to shop, period. I went into the store to return a beautiful gift I got. And I said to the woman, I like this shirt, but it's the wrong size. She said, oh, why don't we get this and you can get a sweater that goes with it? I said, I don't need a sweater and I'm not paying full price for this. Why don't I go speak to the manager, see if they'll adjust the price? She came back and took 30% off the price of the sweater that wasn't on sale. Now, who's ever heard of Bloomingdale's adjusting prices on the floor? And once they do it, they know I'm never going to pay full price at Bloomie's anymore, right?
And now neither am I.
No, exactly. So we never adjust pricing. We never have sales. We don't have birthday sales. We don't profit share with staff. We're in the business of providing the best care in New England, period. Patients know they don't come to our practice because it's a bargain. They come for great care. And sometimes people say, gee, the fillers are less expensive up the street, Dr. Dover. I say, well, that's terrific. If you'd like to go there, you go ahead. If things don't work out, I'll be here waiting for you. And I walk out of the room. And they almost invariably say to the nurse, is he not going to come back? They say, no, he's gone. No, but I want him to do the filler. No, he's not coming back. I'm sorry. But of course I do come back eventually if they say, no, I want to go ahead, because we're just not in the discount business. This is not Walmart. This is not Amazon special pricing with free shipping. This is retail dermatology. It's the best we can offer, but we provide service to back it up. And if it's not perfect, we're there. We take their calls immediately and fit them in no matter what time of day. So it was just before 7 p.m. on the East Coast when we started this webinar, and Kavita was seeing her last patient. Here's a mother of 3 young boys, and she was fitting in her last patient because she said, where am I going to put them? I've got to see them sometime. And so that's why her practice is busy. But you pivot. So I love this idea of kids got a laceration. You want to go to the ER? Shall I just do it for you? Kavita's surgically skilled. Why not? It's fun to do. You provide a skill and a benefit. And where does that mom go for the rest of her life? She tells everybody she's ever met that Dr. Mariwala, not only is she lovely, but she treated Johnny's cut when he fell during COVID, and I didn't have to go to the ER and risk our family to COVID. So patients remember this for the longest time. Your practice should be a place where patients love to come. You should repeatedly hear them say, I love coming to your office. I've never been to a medical office like this. I wish more of the doctors. and their nurses and staff were as nice as you. Now, of course, not everybody's going to say this. I got a complaint this afternoon. Patient doesn't want to see you anymore, but she's going to give the office one last chance and wants to see one of your colleagues. I wrote back to the staff. I said, this patient's been to every dermatologist in Boston. She's not been happy with any. I will never make her happy, but there's not one doctor in our practice who's going to want to see her. So let me figure out how to discharge her, but we just can't make her happy. So the customer isn't always right. My close colleague, Chris Foley, who runs our practice, has taught me this. They're not always right, but you have to take it on the chin most of the time, which is why the Ritz and the Four Seasons are what they are, right? Like
Absolutely.
I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Jones. Let's give you a new bed. Like, come on. There's nothing wrong with the bed. It's your back, buddy. But, you know, so you got to be able to really suck it up, because there's no point fighting back with the patients, because in the end, they'll tell everybody on social media. So Kavita, you're a social media maven.
Well, let me ask you one question.
How do you deal with your reputation? Please go ahead.
Before we do that, so, you know, everyone talks about what it was like in 2008, 2009, and they feel like feels like that time period. Were there any tips or things that you found to be really successful when the last recession hit that you could share with all of us?
Well, one tip is that as the Dow goes, so do cosmetic patients. It's almost linear. It's remarkable. It's never been published. There's something called the Luxury Goods Index, and you can look it up. There's an index that looks at Tiffany and Dior and LMHV and follows how these companies and their sales are doing. As the stock market goes up, they go up. As the stock market goes down, even if people are not spending that money, they feel poorer. So being diversified is crucial. So cosmetic patients left in droves in 2009. Around March of 2009, couldn't find a cosmetic patient because everybody felt 50% poorer. They were, but it was on paper. But general dermatology filled all the slots. So we just pivoted. So I said, just fill my slots. I hate not being busy. So I said, they said, are you sure, Dr. Dover? I said, you put in anybody who wants an appointment. And then we built back up. So someone has to pay those bills. You can't let staff go. You'll never get them back. So I think being diversified and still providing the best care possible and being available, it's amazing how when the doctor's in the office, the slots fill up. So if Kavita's there and it's not full at 8 in the morning, patients can't say, oh, really? The doctor will see me today? I'm coming in with my 2 kids. Bingo. That's a lot better than having empty slots on a staff that are twiddling their thumbs and surfing the web and causing grief. So that's my one recommendation, is stick with your program, stick with the long-term plan. It always comes back. It's always cyclical.
Well, that is definitely encouraging. I think that we're all bracing for what's going to come next, and it feels like no one's really sure. The pundits say one thing, patients are saying another thing, but I agree. I think general derm is still very much in demand. And as far as patients go, I think you're always going to have somebody who has a spot that they're worried about. We tend to have later hours. A lot of practices will finish at 4, they finish at 5. I think it is about knowing your community. I practice in the suburbs of Long Island. The majority of people work. And so to be able to offer slots that are after 5 o'clock, patients do appreciate that, because nobody wants to take a day off of work to go to a doctor's office anymore. And a lot of people, though they're still working from home, they appreciate being able to kind of zip out either early in the morning or late at night. I always sort of lament that I think I see as many patients from 3 to 7 on some days as I do from 9 to 3. So sometimes you just wonder, like, should I only work in the evenings? Like, it's crazy. But people really do appreciate if you're flexible with your hours for them and their busy lives.
So Kavita, thanks. Let's talk a bit about social media. How do you deal with reputation management? It used to be if a patient was upset, she'd tell her neighbors. They would usually say, happy patients tell 1 person, unhappy patients tell 10. Now it's a happy patient tells 1 person and an unhappy patient tells about 10,000 with the stroke of a key. And suddenly it's, that Dr. Dover overcharged and he was rude to me and he rushed me. And I'm thinking, are they talking about the same person? Like, how could 9 people think I was terrific and 1 think I was the devil incarnate? But you've got to spend a lot of time trying to back that up. So how do you manage your reputation and not hide, but sort of smother the one unhappy person? Because you can't make everybody happy, but how do you get those positive reviews up and the negative ones less prominent?
It's so funny. a colleague of mine told me this once, that you could see 100 people in a week and 99 of them could love you. And the one patient who says the negative comment, that's the one you focus on. And it's like you lose sight of the 99 people you made happy. I think that one thing the pandemic has done is that it's changed what social media and reviews are. I think everyone's just sort of negative now about a lot of things. So there was a time in which we'd worry so much about what Yelp said, and you'd worry so much about what it said on another review website. And we used to spend time encouraging patients like, oh, please, if you'd like to post something positive about us, we'd really appreciate it. We're so glad you had a good experience. And nowadays, I've actually just learned to let it go. If there's something that's really bad, I always respond to it. And I say, the line that I use is that at Marijuana Dermatology, our goal is to always provide excellent care and give you expertise in the results that you achieve for your skin. If we have failed you in this regard, we would love to speak to you in person. We never think engaging online is the most productive way for your health. And I think that comes across as a very and you can see I write this enough that I know it, but it's not, you never say sorry, because what exactly are you sorry for if the interaction is just somebody's perception of what you're trying to explain to somebody? Call me because I want to talk to you and I want to make it right. And then you're also explaining to anybody else who reads it that hey, you're not just telling this person to comment or making it go away. You're actually interested in making sure the person has a good experience, so that if somebody does read that negative comment and they read your comment afterwards, they still feel like, oh, they seem like not a weird place. Obviously, you want to encourage people to give good comments. I think one thing that's happened on social media is that Instagram and TikTok have dominated lately for young physicians as a way to attract aesthetic patients. And I think it's a slippery slope. My best advice for that would be to remain true to who you are as a physician. I think a lot of people end up wanting to be Insta famous. And I always tell residents, your role as a physician will always make you more money and provide you with more success and more feeling of reward than any instant famous viral anything can ever give you. And as much as you hear about what people are getting on Instagram for posts and social media, you go to work and you see patients all day long. Never, ever will you be less successful than somebody who's famous on TikTok or Instagram. Not ever. And I know the really big accounts, I know what they make. Not ever. You will always do better showing up to work on time and seeing patients with a smile on your face.
I think that's very powerful, especially coming from you. We've trained 75 or so fellows who are board certified dermatologists who then spend another year with us doing laser and cosmetic and Mohs surgery and research, and many go on to become leaders in the field. A significant minority of them feel they need to do social media because their social media consultants tell them not only do they need to do it, but they need to, their patients need to know about them, they want to see pictures of them doing their hair with their daughter or putting on their skin face or what they did on the weekend. And while that may be true of some patients, when we surveyed our practice, we see 67,000 patients a year in one site. It's one of the busiest practices in the country. We survey our patients. We surveyed over 1,000 individuals. Less than 5% said they depend on social media for determining who they would go to see or who they would get their care from. And these are all comers. We're not talking about a bunch of old farts, but people of every age group, because in the end, they ask their doctor, they ask their friends, they want to see some written suggestions. It usually takes 3 touch points before they'll call Kavita and make an appointment. That's a lot of touch points. Social media could be one of those, but it turns out that's the minority. And the other issue is that a lot of young people who go to social media want everything, need nothing, can afford little, and are never happy. So one of my favorite fellows that I've ever trained has a very big social media presence. Patients see him from all over the country and fly to see him from all over the country. What did he tell my colleague, Dr. Arndt, recently? He said, Dr. Arndt, if I could just have one of your 60-year-old patients, just one a day, I'd be so much happier. because they have the money, their kids have finished college, they can afford it, need it, and are happy with the results. So as Kavita points out, is it really Insta fame you want, or do you want to have a busy, successful practice filled with nice people who you'd like to invite to your house for a dinner party? So we have visitors constantly. They say, Dr. Darver, why are your patients so nice? I say, if they're not nice, they don't get invited back. Well, what do you do with them? I said, well, I find a way to have them see someone else in the practice or see someone else down the street who's very skilled, but I just let them know that I don't think I have the skill set to meet their needs and expectations. I wish I did, but then they say, no, I'd like to stay with you. I said, I know, but I really think Dr. Smith down the road has the skill set for you. And I actually write a letter of introduction. They're just not my cup of tea. I just can't make them happy. But as Kavita points out, a busy practice with nice patients is what you really want. In Boston, for people in LA, they're not flying to Boston to see me. They're going to see the local person there. So I'm really helping to fill the practice of someone in Long Island or New York or Washington or LA or Denver. Do I really want to do that? So I prefer to write books than to post, but that's just generational. But I think the answer is you do what's true to you. So what makes you happy?
You know, it's interesting. There was an article written in the plastic surgery literature, and they looked at, where do you find your doctor when you're going to do a procedure? And patients do look online. They do know that Instagram, Facebook are areas where they do their research to learn about a procedure, to see before and afters. But when they ask them what actually makes you want to choose a physician, patients were actually turned off when they saw a lot of pictures of the physician's personal life. They're not interested in what you ate that day. They're not interested in your dog. Maybe they're mildly interested in your kids, but they actually want to see posts of you doing the things that you do professionally. Not interested in your Halloween costume, not interested in your bikini. So I think that that's a very telling statistic. And Dr. Darver, from what you just explained, what you found in your practice, I think that rings true. For me, my Instagram following grew by me being totally nerdy. Like, I do a lot of teaching on Instagram for the residents, and I do a ton of, quizzes and like hardcore derm surgery factoids. And I'm shocked how many of my patients are like, oh, I love it when you teach derm at night. I'm like, do you understand what I'm talking about? But they love it because they feel like, wow, this is a person who's pretty serious. I want my doctor to be kind of serious, and they really know what they're talking about. That to me is the essence of what a physician staying true to themselves for a physician account is. Now, if you want to have a lifestyle account and you want to be a party planner or you want to have a fashion account, well then obviously that's a different goal entirely. The one thing I would say though is on social media, sometimes it does help to post consistent before and afters to build a certain part of your practice. Like, I've posted a lot of lip pictures before and after, and I've been surprised how many people come in now for lip filler in particular. I like doing it, so I don't mind it, but that was something that I very specifically went and focused on, and it was helpful to me. So that's one way I think social media can help you build out one section of your practice.
Fantastic. Well, Karen, I just want to turn to you for a second and want to make sure that we're addressing some of the questions that are coming in. So perhaps you can let us know as we move along. We're going to save time at the end to be sure we cover any questions that come in. But I think we're covering an awful lot of topics in a very short period of time. Kavita, how do you segregate your practice, the general derm and the cosmetic patients? I know some practices have 2 waiting rooms. A fancy one, less fancy one. I personally think that's totally unacceptable. We like both waiting rooms to be the same, nice for everybody, because my best cosmetic patients come out of the waiting room, because every child in the waiting room has a mother and a grandmother, grandfather. Every patient with a port wine stain has an entire family. We take care of every patient just one at a time with respect and dignity. You never know, and you can't tell these days what anybody's made of. We saw a patient yesterday. And the nurse said, well, there's a woman, she's in a little bit of a rush because she's a little hungry and she's got to get to lunch. Do you mind seeing her next? I had no idea that she comes from one of the wealthiest families in the world, because she was dressed very down to earth, but she was down to earth and my nurse didn't have a clue. But it was remarkable. She's the daughter of a multi-billionaire from India. But you never know. But if you don't treat everybody the same way, you would have missed this opportunity. She shifted all her dermatology care to our practice after our visit. only because the nurse said, go in there first. Don't go there last because she's in a little bit of a rush. And she appreciated that. And you just never know. It's like when Oprah walked into a store wearing jeans and a sweater and no one knew who she was and they threw her out. They didn't realize this is one of the most powerful women in the world. And they threw her out of the store because they thought she probably couldn't afford the things in the store. She could have bought the entire store with what was in her pocketbook, probably. But they made a big mistake. So, Kavita, how do you deal? I know you have a very broad practice, lip fillers, lacerations in kids, PD derm, skin cancer surgery. They're very different.
So we actually have, just for space reasons, we have 2 different floors. So upstairs is where we do all the surgery and cosmetics, and all the rooms have lasers, and downstairs is where we do all the medical derm. Simply for space reasons, we don't have a wide space, we go up. It's worked out well for us because we can have both floors kind of humming at the same time. For me as a person, I like separation in time for my schedule. Although I will fit in toxins in between my general derm, I like being in surgical mode. I like being in aesthetics mode. So I have them as separate days in my practice. What do you do, Jeff? I know you're mainly cosmetic.
Well, no, this is incredibly important. So we like to silo as well. And I'll go back a bit because some young people on the call are thinking, well, I want to transition my practice to be a little surgical, little cosmetic, little general. But so you can't just add a new procedure and not take away something else. So we have general dermatologists in our practice who work in a practice with maybe more devices than any practice in the nation. Yet they don't use any of them. They don't inject fillers, don't inject toxins because they're experts at general dermatology. They do particularly well financially. They score 5 out of 5 on hundreds of evaluations every year. But they're so good at it and so efficient at it that they do particularly well because they're so good at what they do. I do a little bit of everything, but I like to silo. So I started out being a skin internist, seeing the sickest people in Boston, but I had laser expertise. So I added 1 morning a week. Then I added an afternoon a week. When they were totally full and there was a waiting list, I added a 3rd. And it took years, but I went from 0 to now. I eventually had 9 sessions a week and 8 of them were aesthetic and laser, but I still left 1 morning where it was pure general derm except for the add fill-in, but I do general derm as the week goes on. So I never say no to a patient who's in the room and says, what do you think of this spot? I say, let's give you a gown and we'll send this to your insurance, just sign this little waiver. So I get behind because I can't say no, but even the family members, yesterday this woman said, my husband's got a funny growth on his eye, what should I do? I said, where is he? She said, he's in the car. I said, call him now and bring him right in. He had a squame on his eyelid. I had to do a biopsy. I got further behind, but they were so grateful. They'll be our patients forever because he would have had to go home, back to Cape Cod, come back, make an appointment, have a biopsy. It was all done, and he didn't even have an appointment, but that's how we sort of cover all of our bases. So she does some aesthetic stuff and general derm stuff, but she'll send her friends. We just know because of the care that she got. So we try to silo, but sometimes it overlaps. But the reason I like to silo is it's the mindset.
Yeah, I agree.
A colleague of ours, the same Instagram expert, is having some trouble with his staff. He walks into the room to see a person he's told has a tattoo. Turns out she's got psoriasis and needs biologics. Now, how the staff confused tattoo with psoriasis and biologic is beyond him, but he's losing his mind over the fact that he's so unprepared when he goes in because the biologic discussion is a far cry from and it's not 5 minutes. Now, tattoo isn't 5 minutes either, but we like to separate them so that we don't have crossover, and we try to stay on time, and we schedule in such a way. We've learned that scheduling is crucial. So there was a paper published in the Medical Journal a few years ago that basically said that if you start 15 minutes behind, you will never catch up ever for the rest of the day. So be in the room when that first patient's there and start on time, and you're more likely to finish on time. And the other is try to book the patient when they might actually be seen, not when you want them to appear on your schedule. So if there's a 7:30 appointment, you better be there at 7:30 ready to see them because they're going to be there ready. Don't show up at 5 to 8 when there are 3 people waiting. You're already 25 minutes behind.
That's such a good point. I actually tell that to myself all the time. I said, if a patient is scheduled for 8 a.m., you have to open that door at 7:45 because they're going to be there at 7:45 because they're expecting to be in the room at 8 o'clock and they want to be out of there by 8:15. Let me ask you this question. For people who are in the earlier part of their practice and they're just building, I have some opinions about days of the week and where to silo. what have you found to be the most successful days of the week to do cosmetics if you're going to build your schedule?
Well, I'll tell you the worst is Monday morning. So I do my general derm on Monday morning because the no-show rate is the highest on Monday morning, especially for cosmetic patients, because they wake up and think, I'm not going to see Dr. Derm. It's 8 o'clock. I'm barely awake. I don't have my face on. I'm not dressed. So general derms, they've been waiting a year to see me. They're worried about something. So the no-show rates are very low, but I switched my Tuesdays to Mondays because of that, because we give it some thought. Friday is my favorite day for cosmetics, but because of COVID, I've been co-opted. And so now they come when I'm available because the waiting list is very long. But Thursdays and Fridays are great because they've got 2 days in case there's some hiding necessary, like after Fraxel, after Q-switch laser, after pulse dye, if they're a bit swollen. Last thing they want to do is on a Monday afternoon have a board meeting on Tuesday. And most of our patients work for a living, women and men. Now, masks help to hide stuff. And my favorite now, because of COVID, is when patients say, what if I'm a little puffy? I say, you just tell them that your video is not working on your Zoom call and they'll believe you. And suddenly you're okay. Say, gee, Karen, I don't know, my video is not working, but I'm here. You can hear me. So there you go. So if you're really worried about how you look, the Zoom calls and the virtual reality has actually helped us a little bit. So people have more downtime in their lives now because they can hide. But that's, in general, end of the week usually is better and fills up first. I don't know. What do you feel?
I could not agree more. My cosmetic days used to be Wednesday and Thursday, and now they're Thursday and Friday. It's made a huge difference in what people are able to do. I will say that's the opposite for surgeries. So when you're doing surgeries, I always do my surgeries now on Mondays and Tuesdays, because if there's a complication, you're in the office, you're not rushing in on a Saturday. If somebody's a bleeder or something's happening. So Mondays and Tuesdays, I do my Mohs every Monday morning and surgeries on Tuesdays. And then the end of the week is my cosmetics. And it's taken a while to sort of understand that silo, but I do think that that is the best split. For general derm,
most surgery patients never no show. They could be handicapped, needing a ride, taking the bus. They've got cancer. They're not going to miss that appointment. Plus, how many Mohs slots could there be on a Monday morning? But if you've got cosmetic patients and you book 15 or 20, and they don't like the no-show rates, if you no-show 20%, that's a lot of patients.
That's a lot of patients. I find that Monday afternoons always get really busy because people through the weekend stuff happens and they're calling you as the Monday morning rolls in and they want to be seen right away. So our general derm in my practice tends to get very busy Monday afternoons. The other thing that I think people really like, no one likes a midday afternoon unless you're like over 75. But even then they don't like driving kind of after 4 o'clock. That's sort of their cutoff. But early morning is this sort of hidden gem that people who are working like to be in and out. And the key to that is that those people who book those early morning appointments, they just want to make sure they don't have cancer. They're not there to talk your ear off about stuff. They don't have time. They're really busy. They're doing what they need to do to get their skin checked, and then they're out.
And you can take advantage of that by simply saying, I know you're pressed for time, even though you don't know that. You say, let's just have a look at that spot. And if you're worried about other things, come on back another time. Bing, bing. How long does that take? A couple of minutes. And they love the fact you saw them so early. So since COVID started, I start at 7:30 in the morning, and those patients are there waiting for me at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, I've seen 4 or 5 patients. Like, that's half a day for most people.
Yeah, it's
patients,
awesome.
that's, so that's actually a lovely little trick. Kavita, we don't have a lot of time left. I thought we'd do maybe some snappers, like your favorite.
We do have questions.
Girls, but let's go to Karen with some questions, please.
Yeah, the first question, which I wanted to know as well, and this is from Nicoletta to Kavita, and it's, what's the name of the virtual scribe company?
Oh, so they're a company called Hello Rache, R-A-C-H-E. And they're familiar with working with EMRs. They're HIPAA certified. They go through all like the training and everything. I've had a fabulous experience with them. Other derms have used them, but they're really good.
Okay, and then the second question's a little long, but it's a great question from Danny. Can you speak to the landscape of social media in this new era? Most new derms seem to have some form of social media presence. As a consumer of social media, I would say that the quote success, end quote, success rate of these accounts are quite variable. with most actually being unsuccessful and borderline cringy, not to mention the level of oversaturation of dermatologists providing the exact same information in a slightly different infographic. I also think that the success rate is highly contingent on independent factors such as the derm's own attractiveness and level of charm. This is to Kavita from Danny.
Hey, Danny, I can agree more. I mean, there's a lot of cringy stuff out there. Here's a different take on it. Although I agree, I think when you follow a lot of dermatologists, they kind of recycle each other's material in a different way. And so you're like, oh, I guess this week we're talking about rosacea. I mean, who knew? Everyone's talking about that. Or they'll like duet other people's videos and make comments on it, which is not, I think, particularly original. The one thing to know is in the broader scope of our outreach. So as dermatologists, we are the skin experts, but we know from data from the ASDS that a lot of the public actually doesn't realize that dermatologists are doctors.
Oh.
That's shocking. So I think that part of doing social media when you're young, and if you have the energy and you have the time, is actually helping to cement the field that the people you should be looking to for advice on skincare concerns is not the random influencer whose only job is that, and they're like, you know, consider themselves experts because they have skin, but really to promote the field of dermatology and our own expertise. So I think that's one way to look at it. And I think that is the right way to look at it, to get your voice out there. So you might only have 100 followers, but those might be the 100 people in your community who didn't know that melanoma can be, you know, so easy to, you know, get with multiple sunburns or however you want. You know, to be successful on social media, you have to, we all know you have to post consistently, you have to post regularly, you have to have a content calendar, you have to do all these things. It's like another full-time job. And I think that if you're going to go down that road, you have to decide, why am I doing this? Am I doing social media because I want to promote my field? Am I doing social media because I want to attract new patients? Or am I doing social media because I want to use it as an additional revenue stream? And you can use it as an additional revenue stream, but it's really not as much as people think it is. I mean, you might get a couple $1,000s for a post and you think, like, $2,500 for a post, that's amazing. Except that, like, if you just saw some patients, you'd be better off. And that's one of the points I want to make, is that it sounds like funny money, but actually seeing patients will always be more profitable and more rewarding than anything you post on Instagram. And again, if you're looking to attract patients, then your message has to be, what is it that your practice or you are offering as your expertise? So while I don't love people dancing on TikTok and I don't love people dancing as doctors on Instagram, I much rather have a doctor talking about acne than, you know, a jewelry maker giving their opinion on cleanser for acne when they have no concept whatsoever. Jeff, what do you think?
Kavita, I love the influencer who's an expert in skin because they have skin. That I'm going to reuse that. That's fantastic. But it's true, right?
One other question from Danny. Do you have a policy for firing patients who no-show to more than one appointment? Do you charge a nominal fee for a first no-show, second no-show? How do you handle this? And this is
what do you do?
Any one of you.
Jeff, you answer first.
Well, this is tricky. Tom Rohrer and I chaired a session on the business of dermatology at the recent ASLMS National Laser Meeting in San Diego just a month ago. And this was discussed by two of our colleagues and then came up for questions, and everybody in the room had a different approach. In the end, we have a policy, but it's used as a deterrent, and we almost never charge patients. Some have strict rules. After one, they get a call. After two, they get a letter. After three, they get discharged. Do you do that to the patient who spends $10,000 every visit but missed, and you find out that her father just died and she's back home in Pakistan burying him, and she missed the appointments, and you're going to discharge her and she refers patients into your practice all day long? No. So we have what's called individual consideration. The staff checks with us. The doctors always say, don't charge that patient. She or he is special. So the dentists are experts at this. People beg to pay the fine so they don't get discharged from the practice. But in dermatology, it's different. I don't know how to make it work, but you've got to make sure it's not punitive. Otherwise, patients will go elsewhere. Kavita, what do you do?
So I do different things for different types of appointments. If you have a Mohs appointment and you just bail on us and you don't show up, we charge you $150. You have 48 hours to, cancel, but that's an important slot for somebody else who had a skin cancer who could have been in it. And so it makes patients come, or at least give us well enough notice that we can rebook the slot. So surgical no-shows, we charge $150. For a general derm, we say, if you haven't shown for 3 times, you'll be charged $25. I don't think we've ever charged anyone. But I will say that, we have Saturday hours, and we are going to be instituting a policy where if you book a Saturday appointment, and this is something that's changed in the pandemic, our Saturday hours were there for availability for working people. And now, since so many people are working from home and have varying work environments, it kind of has become just like an extra overflow slot where anyone who needs an appointment gets a Saturday slot. And so the no-show rate gets very variable, especially in the summertime. So what we started doing is saying to patients, if the physician's coming in to see you on a Saturday and you don't show up, then you will be charged $25. And that's improved our ability to retain that full schedule. But I think it's also true. If I'm going to be here on a Saturday to take care of you, it's because you really need a Saturday appointment. And if you don't come, you're going to be charged. We also take deposits. Do you take deposits on cosmetic procedures, Chef?
We do. In fact, it's 50% of a significant fee. Now we have credit cards on file, so it's a virtual hold, but they get dinged and it still comes to the doctor. But it's always still a little bit tricky. The patient calls an hour before the appointment for a Fraxel that's a few $1,000s, and she said, I was on my way, but I had to go to the school because the nurse called and said, Johnny's sick, and it's real. Are you going to charge her? She will not be happy, let me tell you, and probably won't pay it. She'll call the credit card company. You always lose when they complain to the credit card company. American Express always favors the client and not the recipient, not the vendor, because the client is their customer. So you always lose. So you've got to be careful. So Kavita's $25 is really a deterrent. She's not going to make a living on $25, let me tell you. It doesn't even cover her costs of the nurse who's there, the staff, the lights, the heat. So it's a deterrent, but it works because people don't like to be penalized. Don't you hate a parking ticket, even though it's less than parking in New York? But people hate to pay tickets. So it's a deterrent, but it really does work. So you have to have some policy. But Danny, it's hard to implement it.
We have a question from Marcus. Have you noticed that Saturday afternoons have higher cancellation rates?
Oh, for sure, especially in the summer months, which is why we started doing that cancellation policy. So we only practice until 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoons. I think after 2 o'clock, nobody comes.
I have another question. There isn't a name assigned. It's a long one. Which are the most time-consuming tasks when managing your own practice? Have those changed during the pandemic? And what is the most common misconception about managing your own practice?
Well, if you don't mind, Kavita, I'll answer the last one first. And the biggest misconception amongst physicians is they're experts at everything. So doctors think they know more than all their staff, and they know all about interpersonal relations, and they're the experts in everything. And the first thing that your staff needs to teach you is you do what you're good at, and we, the managers, will do what we're good at. So one of my colleagues who's touchy and feely and thought he was an expert in everything learned from our staff early on that he should not learn the business of every single nurse in the practice, nor interfere with the head nurse dealing with the staff. So there's a problem with a staff member, we tell the boss, in other words, the division head, and it's up to them to resolve the problem. And then we wash our hands of it, because doctors, for the most part, are not particularly good managers. I would say that's the thing I've learned, and I try to just lay off because I'm a hands-on sort of guy, but it doesn't work out most of the time when you actually get involved in things you know nothing about.
I would also say that, and this is true as soon as you leave residency, when you're a resident, you tend to be friends with the nurses, you're friends with the staff, because you're sort of like part of that whole group. When you have your own practice, you cannot be friends with your staff. You can be friendly with your staff and you want them to be friendly with you, but you are not friends. So you have to keep that line pretty clear, because once you start buying breakfast for the staff, let's say if you have a morning staff and you have early morning hours, you're like, oh, it's gonna be fun, you know, I'm gonna buy you guys breakfast today. Well, it's really hard that once you let the monster out of the gate to claw it back, because you will soon find yourself in 3 months where the staff comes in, they're bringing their own coffee and they're not really so interested in loading your rooms because that's the culture you set up. So I think it's really important to keep certain lines. You don't have to be strict about it, but just remember that there's certain things that you don't have to be besties about. The thing that I find to be most time consuming is watching how appointments are made. I think monitoring your templates is really important. I find that I'm always like tweaking things of where I want skin checks to be, where I want certain follow-ups to be. I still haven't mastered like my ideal schedule with flow, because I think it keeps changing with time. So that's someplace where I still struggle with, you know, payroll's time consuming and all of that. It's when you have a smaller practice, but there are automated ways to do it that are easy. But I think that's the one thing. And then making sure you've got good handouts. Trying to automate as much as you can is really key.
Karen, we've lost your voice.
Great. I have a flurry of questions. A few more. Sorry. Is it still worthwhile starting a practice in this day and age in light of private equity groups acquiring practices and offering larger sign-on bonus, etc.? It can be difficult for newer practices to compete for staff. And that's from Marcus. And then we have 2 more after that.
Well, Marcus, I'm glad you raised the elephant in the room. Private equity and dermatology. I have very strong opinions about it, but I'm not going to let my personal opinions weigh heavily. If you have a chance and you haven't yet read this book, go to chapter 13. There are 3 incredibly interesting essays, 2 for, against, and maybe by 3 of our colleagues on private equity and dermatology. And we just have a piece that was just published in Dermatologic Surgery looking at outcomes. The problem is private equity is private. These are not publicly held companies. They don't have to report, so they don't analyze what they're doing to dermatology. I personally think it's not good for dermatology in general, because as Kavita knows, because she did this once for a living, private equity, their sole role is to make money for their shareholders and not to take care of patients. Dermatologists take care of patients and they happen to get paid to do it. And so there's a diametrically opposed goal in mind. And I have lots of colleagues, like most of my colleagues have sold to private equity. I understand it. They get an exit strategy from their practices, and I get it. But if I was a young dermatologist starting out, I would look very carefully at joining a practice like Kavita's that's privately owned by a dermatologist, or starting your own rather than joining the private equity group, because you will be an employee forever. I know my colleagues say, well, you were an employee at Mass General and at the Harvard hospitals for a while. I say, I know. That's why I have my own practice now. I'm an employee of me. So I do it in my image. I get paid well, but I get to do it in my image. It's hard work, but it pays off. So you have to decide, do you want to work for a big company who can tell you exactly when to start, when to finish, how many patients to see, how much staff you can have for support, how many lasers you'll get, why you have to switch from Botox to Dysport because they get it for less, even though you don't want to. And I have to tell you, they're in charge because they write the check. So that's the big issue with private equity. And it's where money gets in the way of the practice of medicine, which I can't stop. It's a natural flow to go from a cottage industry to the accumulation of these practices. And it's going to continue until there are almost no practices like ours or Kavita's left. But there is a place, I think, for smart young dermatologists, young men and women who have the energy like Kavita did. She just opened her practice, what, Kavita, less than 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of hard work being a mom and a wife and a daughter and having to take care of your practice at the same time and becoming president of ASDS, all of that. But it takes energy, but you have it in your own image, so you get to call the shots, but it's hard work. So Kavita, perhaps you could add to that.
I mean, I really couldn't agree more. I think the one thing is that as a practicing dermatologist, you will never starve. So let's just take that as a fact. You will never starve if you hang a shingle. Then you have to ask yourself, what is it that I'm doing medicine for? I think most dermatologists who are coming out today are the top of their class. That's what it takes to match in dermatology. So in your basic, mindset, you're independent, you're go-getters, you want success. So why would you go and then be an employee of like some dude who's not even a doctor? And I know I say that in a way that sounds very demeaning or like judgy, and it is a little judgy because I am in private practice, and like Jeff, I also work for an institution. But you know what, at the end of the day, the problems that happen in my practice, and you will always have problems in your private practice. When I first started the first 5 years, we would joke around and say, what was the disaster of the day? Because inevitably there will be some like crazy disaster that you can't even think of. And you're like, why am I doing this? But at the end of the day, those disasters, they're mine. They're mine to own, they're mine to fix. And you can choose to then bring on colleagues who you love working with and who you want to share your practice life with, who do become your sort of marriage buddies in your own practice. And there's something to developing something that's your own mom and pop shop. It is not 9 to 5. You don't leave it at the door. You can't. But there's a sweetness in that juice. There is a sweetness in that hard work. There's a sweetness in like your first 4 computers that you buy, when your phone systems are automated, when you have a new business card and you can afford the fancy card stock. There is a joy that comes with that hard work that really is not paralleled when you're going to work for a company. That being said, everyone's life circumstances are different. So you might be paying off student debt. You might be starting a family. You might not have a support system to be pregnant and start a private practice and kind of do all of these things, which is what I did. But that doesn't mean it's out of reach for you. So I still believe in the fierce independence of physicians. I still believe in being that person who makes your own destiny. And again, I just want to reiterate, you will not starve to death as a working dermatologist. So be brave and cast out that shingle.
Okay, we have about 6 more questions to go, and I just want to let everyone know that if I don't get to you, we'll forward these questions to both presenters via email. I'll ask them to respond, and then I'll email you a response. But the last one from Kimberly, because Kimberly and Gabrielle, the last 2, because they hadn't asked, and now it's Heather. So let's get to the first one. It's more than 7 now. Can you reiterate, and this is from Kimberly, what your policy is regarding patients who do not pay their balance that insurance doesn't cover? What backup do you have for when, that's another question, for when staff calls out? So the first one, what's the policy when a patient doesn't pay the balance that insurance doesn't cover?
Well, they're duty bound to pay. They've signed a contract when they come to the office. And so we keep credit cards on file. You have to be careful dinging these people because they can call the insurance, they call their credit card company. They get an announcement in the mail, they go to collection, and that usually stimulates them to pay. And if they don't, they're not allowed in the office. So when they call to make an appointment, a big red flag comes up and says, Mrs. Jones, Dr. Dover can't see you until you pay your balance. How would you like to take care of that today? And if they've got a skincare problem, they know they're going to pay it. And it's usually a small amount of money, like really small amount. And sometimes they just say they didn't get the bill, which is hard to imagine. But our AR is very low because we've got 6 or 7 people who spent all day long chasing up every penny that's owed to us. It's just the policy of the practice. So I don't think you can let them off the hook. They don't pay, they're not allowed to come back. It's very straightforward, right, Kavita?
Yeah. I do the same exact thing. And if there's a patient who has a deductible that they don't pay us, we actually write to the insurance company so that it goes back on their balance. Because the insurance company, if they have a deductible and let's say they owe you $300 and they don't pay it, well, the insurance company give them credit for the $300, but they didn't pay it. So we send a letter to their insurer and we copy them to let the insurer know that the patient did not pay their deductible and that is still their balance so that they'll get it from the next doctor.
Sorry, I hate to belabor this point, but it's so important. We didn't talk about it a lot before. You are running a business. Doctors want everybody to love them. Lawyers don't care. With lawyers and business people, it's business is business, and then they go and play golf with you and they're all chummy. But Kavita worked in that world for a while, and I've learned this from my friends who are lawyers and business people. And they say, Dr. Dover, you're a business person. You run a business. So we have business people who do this for a living in our practice. I never ask for the money. They do. But their job is to collect every penny. We had a director of billing. She'd go after 38 cents. I said, Joan, it's 38 cents. She said, Dr. Dover, you're owed this money. They're under contract. We're getting the 38 cents. She was the best biller in the state of Massachusetts. She had the highest rate of collections in all of Mass. Why? Because she cared, as if it was her 38 cents. So I learned from her, enough Mr. Nice Guy, right? We're nice to the patients, but you have to have people who are willing to go after the money. So in Kavita's case, she says, we send it back to the insurance company. And then they're really in trouble, right? Because the insurance company's already paid them and they're not paying you the money they got. So.
Yes, and I think, again, keeping that credit card on file is really important. And then if patients come and they have a large balance, they have to pay it. I mean, we won't see them because, again, remember, your time has value. So though that patient might drop out of your schedule, if it gives you a second to have a sip of coffee, that has value to it. So you can't be working for free because, again, they'll tell their family members, oh, my husband didn't pay his balance and he still got steam, and all these other things. So we have a financial responsibility that patients sign whenever they start as patients in our practice, and we try to stick to it. But accounts receivable is a big headache.
Gabrielle, and then Heather, and then we'll respond. So Gabrielle wants to know, short and sweet, what do you use to automate payroll? Or what service do you use for payroll?
I use AccuData, and they have like an automatic timing thing. There is a way, so I still do my staff schedules. I don't have as big a staff as Jeff, so Jeff could never do his schedule because you can't schedule 35 people. That's insanity. I think maybe you do your own schedule. I wouldn't put it past you. But there's an online template called Find My Shift. It's very easy. And so it calculates hours for every person. And then we do a basic, time card. They punch in and punch out. And it's easy. All the payroll companies offer something that they can do it electronically on a computer. But one thing that we make very clear to all of our employees, and it's in our employee handbook, we will pay you for 15 minutes before the start of your shift and no more than that. And we will pay you for 15 minutes at the end of your work hour and no more than that. You do not want to encourage people who make mistakes on timesheets, then just sort of sit around for another hour figuring it out on your dime. No, you're paid for to finish this job, and you get an extra half hour, 15 minutes before, 15 minutes after, and you have to get it done in that period of time.
So we use a company called Paylocity, but there are lots of these gigantic companies. You have tons of choices. You should vet them, and then you should actually get them to bid for your work and your business. We don't have a punch card. We literally have people log into a computer, and we know exactly when they started and exactly when they finished, and there's no overtime allowed. So if they dawdle after their hours, they can dawdle all they want, but they get cut at 5 o'clock when they're finished. They could stay and punch out at 5:30, but if they weren't working and it's got to be assigned overtime, which is accepted, they don't get paid for that. So that's one way. You've got to watch all the P's and Q's. You've got to watch every penny. So we have people in our practice who hate people spending their money unwisely. So anything more than a $5 expenditure is not allowed in our practice without the chief operating officer signing off on it. So there's no pilferage, and there's no waste, and there's no people taking things. They won't notice if I bring all these medical supplies to my home for my first aid kit. Well, that's stealing, right? You can't do that. So you have to have people, because you don't have the time to do that, and you don't want the inclination to do that. But we've got a head nurse who loves to save money. So she spends half of her week finding better pricing for all our med surg stuff. There's a national organization that came to us and said, we could save you $100,000 a year on med surg. 3 months later, they came back and said, do you mind if we figure out how you save more than we could save? So their model was not nearly as good as our one person who just was really good at saving. So you got to look at pricing big time, because they just want to charge you more than they really deserve.
The other thing that's really important in terms of accountability is make sure you know where your cash is. So patients will pay cash for cosmetic procedures. They will pay cash for co-pays. We have a 3-person sign out for all cash transactions, and I'm the final sign out. So everybody hands the money to me at the end of the day. And that really makes sure that there's no funny business that like a 5 goes missing or a 10 goes here or whatever goes there. So it's really important to set up your processes for reconciliation of all charges through the day and be able to sign out checks, cash, and credit, and make sure that that tallies at the end of the day. And you can't just have one person sign off on it. I recommend multiple.
Yeah, one very quick story. You can make a 6 into an 8 very easily and pocket the 2, which happened to us, where someone was changing the cash amounts and pocketing the $100 bills herself for a long time till we caught her. She then got a job somewhere else in town and did the exact same thing. So you've got to be, someone's got to be watching every penny, because pilferage is actually pretty easy, especially
pretty easy, yeah.
Through.
The other thing is
the 10s and 20s, right? Oh, I don't know where that copay went. Oh, so $80 copay suddenly is 40, and they take 40 over and over and over again. That's a lot of money over a few months.
We also, one lesson I learned from my father's practice actually is when you accept credit cards on your terminals, make sure that nobody can reverse transactions except for you. So my dad had a manager who was reversing transactions for patients, and that reverse transaction would go to his personal account. And so he was arrested by the FBI. Of course, like that, when those things happen, you never want to be in that situation. But, you know, the money was never recovered. The guy didn't, quote unquote, have the money. But, you know, all those little things like, can a charge be reversed? Can you give patient credit? All of that stuff should be, you know, high level authority that nobody else should have except you or one trusted person.
Right. So keep in mind, Kavita does it herself. You do not have to be the person who does it, but you have to someone who is trustworthy beyond belief, who would not be able to sleep at night for $1 missing from the practice. Someone who has the ethics and morals of God, right? And they're hard to find, but when you find them, you know it. And that's the kind of person you want who's the final sign off. So it's either got to be you or someone like that, but not a relative.
The final question from Heather. And Heather, I'll thank you. She said, thank you for this. What are your thoughts on doing locums until you find the right job for you? Until you found the right job for you.
Jeff, what do you think?
A great idea. I learn more visiting practices than any other method of learning. I've talked about it. I think these preceptorships at ASDS, ALS-LMS, and Women's Derm offer are incredibly valuable. So you do a locum, you see what they do wrong. You see what they do right, but you think, I'd never have my practice like that, or I might like this city. I might want to live here. Might even want to work at this practice. So why not? As long as you're not locked in for long periods of time. In this day and age, you can do it. And as long as there's licensure and it's a good practice, what a great idea. Make some extra money, pay off debt, see what you like, because it's a lot easier to do it right the first time than to have to keep changing. What do you think, Kavita?
Oh, 1,000%. You know, a lot of people don't realize that the first job you have, the majority of people, when they finish residency, change that first job within 2 years. So you spend all this time and effort, like, what's going to be my job? What's going to be my job? And then 2 years later, like, I don't know, I can't do this anymore. And you switch completely. I think locums is fabulous. I think it lets you see the United States, lets you see different practice models. It lets you decide, you know, do I want to do general derm 5 days a week, or is this good for me for 3 days a week? And it gives you some sense of how much your earning potential is. It's always one of the biggest unknowns. I mean, in residency, like half your stuff is still kind of like IKEA, or you've made it yourself. And the concept that you can afford like a nice car, and you might have a cleaning lady, and you might have, you know, go to nice restaurants, and it's not going to make you feel stressed out, is so foreign to you that it's a little jarring. So go out there, earn some extra money, understand what that's like, and then see how people practice. I mean, for me, when I was an intern at Mass General, I used to go hang out at Jeff's practice. He was so kind to me that he let me just go hang out there as a medical intern. I learned so much just by seeing how his practice flowed, how the setup was, that when I set up my own practice, I did the same round kind of rooms at the edges and the nurse's station in the middle. But I learned that from Jeff's practice because it keeps everything flowing. And the people who are in the middle, they always know what's going on because they can see the edges. I would never have known that had I not visited his practice and seen it in action. So his advice there is spot on, I think.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for joining us. And I have a very important announcement that I should have announced before, that for all the attendees in this webinar, you will receive a 25% discount on the Business of Dermatology book. These are the authors who provided you with tips, but there are even more tips that you will find in the book. And if you use the code Dermatology25 on our www.thieme.com, if you Google Thieme.com, Dermatology in caps, and Evelyn has posted it in the chat, DERMATOLOGY caps 25 for your 25% discount. And it's not an expensive book on the Business of Dermatology for all the additional tips and for the questions that we couldn't get to, because Kavita has 3 boys she needs to get home. She needs to go home too.
Well, the reality is Jeff and I could talk about this stuff forever, but I will. You know, when Jeff and I put this book together, we asked people who we knew would give you really honest advice. So each chapter is written in a very heartfelt way by people who've gone through the struggle and actually were kind enough to give their input on how to not make the same mistakes. We even have like a chapter that's written by an architect and a dermatologist on office flow with diagrams. And I'm really proud of this book because I think it's an incredible resource to just read from top to bottom.
Well, I want to thank Kavita for being my partner in crime in this, and thank Karen especially for helping to put this together, and Evelyn, who is in the background, who made all this work out. So thank you all, and thanks for so many people signing in and sending in so many questions. Thank you all very much. It's been great fun.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you, and don't forget to get the Business of Dermatology with your 25% discount. You won't regret it. It's really a good book. Thank you.